I am so delighted to be here today to share a Christmas story with you. This story that I'm going to share is special to me. It's special because I wrote it. Well, I think I wrote it. Maybe I wrote it. You see, sometimes I have trouble getting to sleep, and instead of counting sheep, I tell myself stories. I make up stories, I work on stories, and one night I'm doing this, I'm working, making a story, and I got to the place where I'm almost asleep, but not quite asleep. And I realized that the story I was working on was building itself. It was doing its own thing. And I liked the story. I really wanted to keep this story, but I was too tired to get up out of bed and go write it down. And I knew if I didn't do something, it would disappear like dreams do, and it would be gone. So somehow, that entire night, I stayed at that level where I wasn't asleep, but I wasn't awake. And all night long, I worked on that story. I rearranged, I made word choices, I did all of these different things, but did I really write this story? Or was it somehow given to me? I don't know. You decide. But for now, the miracle of the Christmas fire. Days are getting short. The wind's a bit more chill. Soon the holidays will be upon us, and the memories will come flooding back as they do every year. Some memories fade as time flows on, but others take on a life of their own. Such is the memory I'm about to share. Actually, this is a memory of a memory, for it is not my story, but my grandfather's. Each year he would share it with me, and now I in turn share it with my children, and soon they will hopefully share it with their own little ones. I was just a little thing when I first saw the yellowed paper pasted in the old scrapbook. Grandpa was looking at it, getting ready to tell its story to all of us kids, like he would every year for years to come, and probably had for past years untold. I was just a boy, he would begin. Times were hard back then. We were in the middle of the Great Depression, but we were one of the lucky families. It was just me and my mom and dad, your great and great-great-grandparents. We had just moved to a little town in the middle of the Dust Bowl. My daddy was a tinker and could make or mend just about anything. Nobody had any money back then, but Daddy still worked nearly every day, taking in trade apples or grain, sometimes a chicken or whatever somebody had to swap. Some days were hard to get through. Some days we just had tomato soup made from ketchup and hot water and a hunk of bread. No butter, though. I don't think I tasted butter even once through the hard times. We kids thought that since everybody had to pitch in and make do, put your shoulder to the wheel kind of thing, that nobody would even try to keep up the pretense of schooling for us. But your grandma organized the mothers, and they did the best they could in the old schoolhouse. And that schoolhouse was big, bigger than I had ever been used to, coming from a one-room schoolhouse with only 12 kids to be taught. No, this one had been built in times of plenty, before the land began to blow away, before the people packed it in lock, stock, and barrel. The town was nearly a ghost town by then, but there were still 50 or so families, most with kids, all with hopes of a better future. It was coming on to Christmas, and even though Christmas would be pretty sparse for all of us, there was still excitement in the air. Johnny Brown had heard talk that maybe there would be a piece of peppermint and an orange for each kid in town. That was something to dream on, I tell you. Nobody had tasted sugar in years, and what fruit was to be had was usually dried by Christmas time. That doesn't seem much to you little guys, but the thought of it was enough to make our mouths water. The Depression was big, big and mean, but not mean enough to take away our faith. Christmas wouldn't be Christmas without a program honoring our Lord, and the mothers had decided that a Christmas pageant was just what the town needed, complete with caroling afterwards, and Santa. Hopefully Santa with a bag full of oranges and peppermints. Every kid in town had a part in that pageant, and nearly every parent was drug in to help in one way or another. There was even going to be a brand new born baby Jesus, though she was a girl. We figured she was so little that nobody would notice. We became master scroungers, making costumes out of bits and pieces of whatever we could find. It was a time of pulling together, and took a lot of the sting out of the hard times. We practiced every Wednesday afternoon and sometimes evening until the week before the pageant. Then we met up every night to fine-tune everything. That last night it was discovered that there were no gifts for the wise men to carry. Mom grabbed me, Johnny Brown, and Sammy Skidwell and had us go up to the school attic to see what we could come up with. Now that old school was big, 3 stories and an extra wing. It took us a long time to find our way and climb up that drop-down ladder. It was like a treasure trove up there. We had a fine time going through old chests and boxes and bags of lost and found stuff. We had so much fun that we didn't pay too much attention to the time we were taking. Eventually, we each found a gift suitable for the kings, a cigar box decorated with bits and pieces of carved wood and cigar bands, a shapely bowl with a lid, and a slim bottle with a cork and chains and beads glued all over it. We thought we had done pretty well and started back down with our booty. We hadn't paid too much attention to how we had gotten to the attic, and soon discovered that we weren't any too sure about how to get back to the auditorium where we were supposed to be. I didn't know this part of school at all, having been closed off because of the dearth of students. Johnny and Sammy had never had classes in this part of the building, so weren't much more help than I was. We just sort of wandered up and down the halls, looking for anything familiar. We did make it down to the ground floor, but still we were pretty lost. It was then that Sammy said he smelled smoke. I told him to shut up, but then Johnny smelled it too. It was getting dark out by now, so even looking out the windows didn't help us, as everything was black. What doors we passed were chained shut, and the windows were barred. By now I was smelling smoke too, but since I was the oldest, I tried to keep calm and keep the other 2 from panicking. I had been in the Boy Scouts, so thought I could get us out of this particular mess. I figured if we just continued walking the same hallway, eventually we would come to either the auditorium or a door that was unlocked. As long as we could breathe and see even a little bit, we should be okay. Eventually, though, the smoke began to catch up to us, and we began to cough, and our eyes began to burn. I had the other 2 pull their shirts up over their noses, and we continued walking. We did come to an unlocked door, and I ran to it and pulled it open, thankful to be almost free. But instead of being sanctuary, there were flames leaping up towards us. We had walked toward the fire instead of away from it. I managed to get the door pushed shut again, but within seconds the flames started licking their way under the metal door toward our feet. Jimmy and Sammy were so scared they were crying and looking at me for direction, but what could I do? And suddenly there was a man there. He looked at me and said, "Son, come with me." I must have been pretty scared myself, because all I could think of was this man was a stranger. I didn't know him. How could I follow him? He held out his hand and said, "Look, it will be okay." And I looked, and in his hand was a picture of me with my mom hugging me from behind, and Jimmy and Sammy all covered in soot behind me and looking around, and behind them was a man. It was okay. Mom must know him. And I followed. He only took a few steps to a window I hadn't seen, pushed the sash up. One by one he lifted us up and told us to run to the other end of the building, that everyone was there. I was the last he lifted out, and as I ran I looked back, but the man had not followed. I reached the crowd of people, found Johnny and Sammy, was looking around for my mom. Almost immediately her arms were around me from behind. She was crying and swearing and praying, all at the same time. Flashbulbs went off in my face, but all I was aware of was that I was safe, that Mom was safe, and soon Dad would be there and we would be family again. It was late when we finally made it home. I was too tired to worry about cleaning myself up and just flopped on my bed and went to sleep with the smell of smoke in my nose and the vision of flames in my head. It wasn't until the next morning that I had time to think about what had happened. When I finally stumbled out to breakfast, after I had washed myself up as best I could, my daddy was sitting at the table reading a newspaper. Where did a newspaper come from? Our town was too dried up to have a newspaper. We didn't even have a post office anymore. But what was most troubling was the picture on the front page. There I was, standing there covered in soot and dirt, with Mom's arms wrapped around me and her head buried in my neck. Sammy and Jimmy were behind us, looking around for their moms and dads, and behind them stood the man who had saved us. He looked like he was standing in smoke because his picture was sort of fuzzy. But how could that be? That was the same picture the man had shown me in the hallway before letting us out the window. How could he have a picture of something that hadn't happened yet? And who was he? Neither Mom or Dad recognized him. I've never found answers to those questions, just like no one has ever come up with any answers about the fire. No one died that night, and the injuries were small. We'll never know how it started or where, but it was the beginning of the end for the town. We did have a pageant of sorts Christmas Eve. Everyone gathered together outside the smoking ruins of the school, and together we sang the carols we had practiced a cappella. Santa did come and brought an orange and a peppermint for each of the children, and then we said our goodbyes. One by one the families moved away, looking for something more, something better, a place where they could hope again. Our little town slowly disappeared into the past, just like the good soil blown away by the winds. All that's left to mark the place where our town was is a crossroads, one going east and west, the other north and south. I've only gone back once. Over the years, I have wondered about the why the fire happened and the how of our being rescued. I figure I'm not supposed to know, only accept. But it has been a blessing to me many times. There have been days when I have felt abandoned, rejected by the world, wondering if it was all worth it. That's when I get out this old album and remember. I know there was a purpose, a reason. Maybe someday I'll understand. But that's not the end of the story. Grandpa paused here and began turning pages in the album. He stopped near the back and pointed to a picture of a man in uniform. Look closely, child. Then he turned back again to the yellow newspaper. Now look at this. And I looked. It was the same man, I'm sure of it. At least I hope it is, because the next thing Grandpa said to me, that man in the uniform, that man was your father. My father, a father I had never gotten to know or even meet in this world. He had died in that uniform. Grandpa closed the album, set it down upon the coffee table, and held out his hand to me. Let's go get us some supper. Your grandma made rolls. Let's get us one with lots and lots of butter. And that's exactly what we did. I hope that all of your Christmas miracles are visible to you, that they all come true, all of your dreams and your wishes. Merry Christmas.